Well, hello everybody and welcome back to the 20 Years of Women on Boards podcast with me, Claire Braund, co-founder of Women on Boards and the CEO. Today we're talking to Kerryn Newton. Kerryn has spent 17 years inside some of Australia's most consequential boardrooms, recruiting directors, advising boards and helping organisations build the kind of governance that holds up under pressure. She's the sort of person who can walk into any boardroom in the country and immediately sense what's working and what isn't. Today, the woman known as the Board Whisperer joins us to talk about what separates great boards from mediocre ones and why the human dynamics in the room matter more than any policy or process ever could. Well, thanks for joining us, Kerryn, and hello.
Hello, my pleasure. It's great to be able to talk to you today.
So, Kerryn, take us back to the beginning. What was the moment you realised governance and directorship was the space that you wanted to build your career in?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I think there's a couple of pivotal moments that happen in anyone's life. And one of mine was when my children were young and they were at a independently run long daycare centre and I was due to go back to work and they needed someone for the management committee. And I've always been a person who puts their hand up. I think, if you're going to contribute to society, do so in a positive way using the skills that you've got. And so I put my hand up and I became the president of the management committee of the Incorporated Association that ran that long daycare centre where my children went. And therein, my love of governance started. And I recall being there, and the Queensland Council of Social Service had some people who were doing governance training. They came in, we sat on the little chairs at 5 o'clock at night, the little kindergarten chairs as a management committee, and got this training on our role and duties as management committee members. And I just absolutely loved it. I just thought this is such a great place to be in. And I still have that booklet and that sits as part of the Directors Australia archives today.
Wow, that is a fantastic story and actually really heartening because, of course, it's the way that so many people start on those boards where you have to put your hand up, because if you don't put your hand up, then nobody else will quite often, and and that organisation needs those people in those particular roles. Great that that's still in the DA archive. So going back even further, you graduated from law school and you found a job in a law firm in Queensland and also went into the Australian Army Reserve where you served for 10 years and you were often the only woman in the room. And then you went on from that to advising some of Australia's most powerful boards. So how did your military experience shape the way you navigate power and pressure?
I was very fortunate that while I was at university, I discovered that you could do your officer training in the Army Reserve while you're also a student, and obviously while I was working as a young lawyer. And I often say this, and I really mean it, it was some of the best management and leadership training I've ever had. And of course, it was at a time in my life where it had great impact because I, was in my young adulthood. I was learning about, how life works. And I learnt some key lessons in the Army. I learned about how to make decisions under pressure, how to get people to follow you. And follow you not because of your position, but because of their trust in you and your ability to bring them along with you. Importantly, I think in part in my career, to be honest, it taught me how to work with men because I was often the only female in the room or in the platoon or wherever I was. And the other thing it really gave me was this real resilience, like the way that a lot of the training that I did works is to make you physically exhausted and then to throw mental challenges at you. So you're making decisions under pressure. And, that's effectively what boards do in many cases. Boards make really important decisions under pressure. And so, all of those threads from my early days in the military have just been absolutely core skill sets that I've drawn on in the rest of my professional life.
You founded Directors Australia in 2009 as a single mum with two small children, and you founded it on a remote and flexible a model, which was pretty radical at the time. So what drove you to back yourself like that?
Well, they say necessity is the mother of invention. So there was an element of necessity, but that's not entirely the story. I certainly needed a way that I was going to be able to be available for my children and earn a good income. And if you go back to 2008, 2009, we didn't have the sort of structured, flexible working practices that we have today. So that was actually quite a challenge for me that I was trying to overcome. But the other part of the story is I had been in private practice as a lawyer, then I'd worked for the Queensland Parliament for a number of years, and I'd worked in the parliamentary service, which is sort of akin in a way to the public service. And I just knew that wasn't a fit for me. I knew that I wanted to go back into the private sector, that I wanted to back myself into something, that I wanted to test myself. A little bit of the military coming back in there as well, to sort of see how far, you can achieve goals. And so it was a mix of those two things. It was really that A, necessity, and B, I just wanted to back myself to do something. And I knew already from the childcare centre experience that I really liked governance. And so those threads came together.
Yeah, really lovely story. You've seen a lot of change, of course, in boardrooms across 18 years at the helm of Directors Australia, particularly in the composition of boards and in the increasing expectations on boards and on their directors. What's the thing about how boards operate in Australia that still frustrates you? So something that you would like to see change?
I mean, there's been a number of changes over 17 years and I think we all acknowledge that the whole strategic and regulatory environment in which boards are operating today is just so different. The thing that frustrates me today, though, is just making sure that even though the job of a director has become harder and has become more demanding, that people who put their hand up and accept board roles have the time to be able to do it and do it properly and are doing it for the right reason. And I'd say over the last 18 months, 2 years, that's one of the things I've noticed is that it's harder to change a board meeting date at short notice because people don't have time. People are trying to compress board meetings into a shorter window. Getting time to do strategy sessions and off-sites and what have you is more difficult because we can't coordinate diaries. So that's not a fault of the individual directors necessarily, but it's becoming just this real pressure point where the expectations are increasing. The time available to meet the expectations is not matching that.
It's interesting. And I think too, there's a lot more people thinking that they want to be a company director as a career option. And we're sort of generating that sense that it's just another, thing that you do as a part of your profession. But you're exactly right. When you've got to have a driver, a reason, a why, and it's got to be bigger than, I think I might add this to my career portfolio. And we're seeing that too.
Absolutely. I think, if I think about the boards that I've worked with in helping them place directors, they're after a director who's really committed to their purpose, no matter what it is. Every company has got a purpose. They don't want someone who's just doing it for their resume or to fill a spot, on the third Tuesday of the month or whatever it might be. So they're really looking for that real connection. And you need to have that connection, I think, when the liability and the time commitment is what it is in today's environment. So there's a number of candidates I speak to where that is the first question I'm saying to them is, why do you want to sit on boards? It's got to be more than this is work-life balance, or frankly, this is good for my status.
Yeah, which is crazy that you'd even get that answer. We've talked about that's the top question. What are the top three then that you ask anyone considering a board role, and what do their answers reveal about them?
So anyone who comes to me or one of my team members saying I want to sit on boards, we're always going to say to them, there's three questions you must be able to answer. And you'd hope that they've thought about some of these things before they speak to you, but not always. So the first one is the why. What motivates you to sit on boards? Have you deeply thought about this? And motivations are varied, but you really need to reflect deeply about the why. The second thing is, what do you bring? Like, what skills and experience sets have you got that you can bring to a board? And you've got to think about what a board does and match them. You might have been great in an operational delivery role, but how does that translate to the board environment? And the third question is, what sort of boards are you interested in? Because, Claire, as you know, and the fabulous work that Women on Boards does, cuts across boards of all different sorts. So we've got the small community service organisation boards. We've got the large listed boards. We've got family company boards, private equity boards. So there's this whole range of boards. And I think, for people who are really looking at making boards part of their career or part of their portfolio career, they do need to think about what is it that they're seeking in terms of the types of board roles. And it's okay to say, I just want a set of community service organisation boards because that's what I want to do. Like, there doesn't have to be this necessarily race to get up a board ladder.
Having been inside hundreds of boardrooms over the past 18 years, when did you first realise you had that gift for reading what was really going on in the room beyond what was being said out loud?
It's very kind of you to attribute that gift to me. I'd like
Maybe
to
it's
think
back to the childcare centre.
Yeah, that's right. I'd like to think that I have that, but you can't guarantee that you always have the ability to work out the nuance behind what you're being told. But part of my approach and part of the approach that we have at Directors Australia is based on more than a tick and flick survey response or a tick and flick checklist for selection criteria for a board role. I think it's about sitting back and listening and observing and building rapport and asking not just the first question but the follow-on question. It's what we ask of directors, really, that second order thinking. So I think that's something that, to be honest, my legal training was probably quite instrumental in. The analysis of what's going on in the environment and sort of, thinking a bit more deeply than just taking things on face value. And so I've been privileged to work in many boardrooms and see many different experience sets, and that's also given me a base on which to draw as I work with more boards. But I often say this, and I truly mean it, I haven't seen it all, because I still see things and I go, well, I've never seen that.
Well, if you read Julie McClelland's Directors' Dilemmas and they are based on true stories, then we haven't seen it all, because the things that come out and that sometimes you think, oh my goodness, how can people get themselves into this type of difficulty? But it happens. So it's interesting.
It does. Boards are a collection of humans, right?
Yeah.
And human nature shines through.
Which leads to my next question, because you've said that if you had one lever to lift board effectiveness, it would be around relationships, not around systems or processes. So can you outline what a truly high-functioning board looks like compared to a dysfunctional one?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the way that governance has matured in Australia, we've got this, generally this nice platform of policies and structures and systems and processes. But that alone will not bring about a high-performing board. It is about the dynamics within the boardroom and the dynamics between the board and management team fundamentally in the work that we do. And so what does that look like? Well, to start with, it's people who are operating from a model of trust and integrity. It's people who can constructively question, who can listen to others and adapt the way that they might think about an issue after listening to others. It's about being an adaptive learner and making sure that your knowledge base is constantly updated as well, because that informs how you're going to approach issues. So all of those things feed into the dynamic, both within the boardroom and between the board and management. And while I come from a legal background and, in some respects, there's a lot of structure to how you might approach an issue legally, what I've come to realise from working with literally hundreds of boards over 17 years, is that sometimes really simple things can make all the difference. And a simple conversation where you've got a new board or a new chair or a new CEO about how we're going to work together. What are our ways of working? What's acceptable and not acceptable to us in our dialogue is just so powerful. And that proactive step of thinking about and giving permission for people to operate in a certain way is part of that dynamic and relationship that I think makes for high-functioning boards.
Mm. This is the year also that boards are really starting to think about and use AI. I've seen a huge sort of shift in the way that boards and directors are now realising that this, great big thing that is AI is here and here to stay, both in how they govern and how they understand both its risks and its opportunities. However, I don't think Australia's ahead in the curve in AI adoption. So how should boards be thinking about AI governance right now? And is it something most directors feel equipped to oversee or not?
It's not surprising that every board we're talking to at the moment is grappling with AI, because as a society we're grappling with AI. This is a fast-changing environment. There's a lot of questions about, the extent to which we can use AI or should use AI. As a broad statement, I'd say last year was a year about boards sort of understanding AI and what it meant. This year, what we're hearing a lot more boards focus on is, have we got the right governance parameters in place? Have we got the posture for AI for our company in place? But also looking for tangible examples of where AI is being used in the organisation. So I think, like anything, we're in this staged approach as we get to know, in this case, really impactful technology better. We're seeing a step change in how boards are approaching the issue. But it is absolutely a conversation for every board at the moment that we're talking to, and they're grappling with it and trying to understand how to best govern in that environment.
Kerryn, you've been a WOB member for many years, and Directors Australia has supported and in many ways been at the vanguard of improving access and transparency in the board recruitment space. So looking back on your journey, how important has WOB been to you, and how would you describe the WOB community and what it has meant over the years?
Right from the beginning of Women on Boards, we've had a relationship as an organisation operating in the same space with really the same purpose, which is to make Australian boardrooms better. And so we've had a fabulous relationship with Women on Boards, with yourself, Claire, with Ruth, and everyone in your team. You've just been fabulous to work with. It's been a great privilege to be able to help you and your members in finding board roles and in some of the other activities we've done together. And I think there's an important role for Women on Boards to play into the future as well. And probably in a nuanced way, what we're seeing now is the whole conversation about diversity on boards, whilst 17 years ago was very much about gender, has now, of course, matured into a conversation that's much beyond that. And I think that the model that you've set out about how a focused effort on some sort of change you want to achieve can achieve change is a great example for other organisations, or indeed your organisation, to follow, to build on that same sort of concept and achieve the same sort of goals that you've achieved.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure for us as well. We love our engagement and a relationship with you. And, of course, you are, one of the very few board-level only recruitment firms. You don't do the full service, you just do boards.
Just boards.
Just boards. So the next frontier then, do you think, with that combination of diversities, is it going to be more around age, do you think? I mean, I think there's a whole opportunity around cultural diversity and First Nations diversity, but I think age is really going to hit us as well, particularly as we look at new technologies like AI and things, and we consider who adapts really fast to those. Are we going to be asking younger people to take on governance roles, or is that something that's not going to quite work? Will they go into the advisory type of space?
I think boards are looking at a whole range of different diversity criteria. Certainly cultural and ethnic diversity is one that we're seeing, a lot more inquiry about. Age diversity is an interesting one. I don't think age and technology always have to be coupled. I know some people who are older and who are probably the most AI literate people I know. So I think there sometimes, can be a little bit of a fallacy that a younger person's going to bring all this sort of digital and technological skill and expertise. But of course some will. At the end of the day, there's this balance of, what is it that we're trying to achieve as an organisation? What's our strategy? And who do we need around the table to be able to help guide and drive that strategy? And that's in terms of their skills, their experience, and their diverse perspectives. One of the traps that I do see boards fall into, though, is, if you take sort of the average size board, which has got 7 seats on it, you can't have one of everything. So you've got to make these choices, and you've got to make these, decisions at the end of the day. And in some cases, the world isn't perfect, because you still might say, well, here's my 7 profiles, but constitutional tenure or some other requirement just means that you can't achieve that. So, it's a balance. What I do think is going to happen, and one of our predictions in our State of the Boardroom report that we released earlier this year, is I do think the tenure of directors is going to shorten, though, because if we follow that logic that board composition is linked to strategy, and strategy is a response to the strategic environment, and the strategic environment is fast changing, it works backwards then logically that you're going to really look at probably the skill sets on your board and want to seek some change in those skill sets on a more regular basis. And, personally, I think 9 to 12 years is a long time on a board. If you had a child and you started a board that day, the child would be in high school by the time you finished your tenure. That's a long time.
You'd go from the childcare committee to the P&C.
You would, absolutely.
Kerryn, what are 3 words that you would use to sum up your journey over the past 20 years, Over the past
20 years.
Or 3 phrases.
3 phrases. I think in a way, I backed myself. That's been one of the things. And sometimes I look back and I go, wow, what was I thinking? Like was that brave or was that stupid? So I think I backed myself. I think for anyone in business, you've got to be resilient. I think, it is hard running a small business, highly rewarding, but it's also hard work. And I think you've just got to be resilient for when you get the hard days to get back up and continue going. So I think there's that. And then I think there's just some, also in all of that, there's a bit of bravery. And I think, Claire, that's something that I'd say to your members who are looking at boards and who want to sit on boards, back yourself, be a bit brave, put your hand up. What's the worst that can happen? You might learn something. Even if you don't get the board role, you might learn something. And if you don't get the board role, just be resilient. Dust yourself off, get up the next day, polish up your resume and resubmit it to the next board that you want to sit on, because you've got a really compelling why.
Kerryn Newton, thank you very much for joining me at the 20 Years of Women on Boards podcast.
My pleasure.